Hello friends, today I'm solving problem 2706, buy two chocolates. So looking at the whole description, you might get intimidated and think, why is this solution an easy solution? Why is this problem an easy problem? But actually all of this description just boils down to finding the first two most minimum prices in this array, and we are basically going to return our value, which should be non-negative. That is, we are going to return our value by subtracting the two minimum values from money, and if that's positive, we return the leftover money, else we just return our money itself. So let's start with finding our two minimum values from this array. So how can we find the first two minimum values from an array? Let us just take an example. So 1 2 3. Okay, I'm just going to take random examples. 5 3 2 1. Okay, so let us suppose that we have this example over here. Okay, so here you can see that 1 and 2 are the minimum values, right? The first two minimum values. But how do we find it? So one way we can find it is to compare the value with all of the values, and if that value is less than all of the values, that would mean that we found our minimum. Okay, let me just put one somewhere over here. Okay, so that we can start from, so we start from first element, which is 4, and what we do is now we move on to the next element and we compare 4 with 3, but 3 is less, right? So 3 is minimum, so we update our minimum value to 3. Okay, so we are just going to use a variable to store our minimum. So now our minimum is 3. Next we move to the next element and we find that our 2 is less than 3, so we update our minimum value. Next 6 is greater, so we do not do anything. Next we find 1, which is minimum, so we update it again. Next value is 9, so we do nothing, and finally we found our minimum value. Now similarly we also need to find our second minimum value. Okay, so what are we going to do is we are going to do the same thing, okay, similar thing, and we are going to do it in just one go. Okay, so in only one for loop, we are going to start from the first element. So initially we assign a very large value, so infinite value, to both of these, and next what we do is we start from the first value and we compare this value with our minimum value. Since it is less than our minimum value, what we do is this minimum value would then be our second minimum. Okay, because so far we know that this is our minimum value. If we found some value which is less than the minimum value, then this value would basically be second minimum, right? Let me just show it in this way. So let's suppose I have 5 here. Okay, 5, and my second minimum is 6. Now I found one more value, which is 4, and that is less than my minimum value. So in this case 4 becomes the minimum and 5 becomes the second minimum, right? So my second minimum is updated with the value of minimum, and minimum is updated with the value that I've found, which is to be minimum. So that is what we are going to do over here. All right, so since we found 4 to be the minimum value, we just update our second minimum to be the minimum value, and then we update our minimum to be our new value. Next we compare with our minimum with the next element, and we found 3 is less than 4. So now our second minimum becomes minimum, which is 4, and minimum becomes equals to 3. Again we found 2, so we do the same thing. We update our second minimum and minimum, and now we have the value 6, and 6 is greater than 2, right? So we do nothing. Next we found 1, so we again update our second minimum and we update our minimum again, and again we have our value 9, and we do nothing again. Okay, let's suppose we have one more value which is equals to 2. Okay, let's suppose it's equals to 2. Now here if you would okay, let us not make it equals to 2. Let it be equals to, yeah, equals to 2. Okay, so here let us have a value 1. All right, so here we have a value 1. 1 is not less than 1, right? So we still have our minimum, which is minimum, but now second minimum is equals to 2, but we have 1 here, right, which is less than the second minimum. So basically second minimum should be updated, so we update our second minimum to be 1. Okay, so that is how we update and get the two minimum values from this array, and finally we are going to return our money, the leftover, which should be non-negative. So let us start coding. So we need our minimum value, so I'm just going to assign it infinity, and similarly second minimum is also infinity initially. And now we are going to start our for loop. Let num of nums, okay, not nums, prices, right, prices. So if, let me just redefine our variable so that now if our minimum is greater than price, that is when we would update our minimum to be equals to price. But before that we also need to update our second minimum to be equals to the minimum, right? And else if our second minimum is greater than the price, that is minimum is equals to we update our second minimum to be equals to the price, and that is how we found our two list values. And now we find our leftover value, which should be equals to money minus minimum minus second minimum. And finally we are going to return if leftover, okay, if leftover is greater than 0, greater than or equals to 0, that is if it is non-negative, then we return leftover, else we are just going to return our money back. Now let's run our code and check if this works. Awesome, this worked. Let's submit this. Great. So this is how we are going to solve this problem, and the time complexity is O of n and the space complexity is constant for this solution. Okay, thank you so much for watching till the end. Please like my video and subscribe to the channel.